You think you're better than me, you filthy black girl? How dare you? Vivian Monroe's diamond-studded hand trembled as her voice sliced through the grand ballroom of the Monroe mansion like shattered glass. The orchestra stopped mid-note. Guests froze mid-toast. Cameras blinked to life like vultures circling chaos. At the far end of the marble hall, Grace Carter, dressed in her maid's uniform, stood frozen, a silver tray pressed tightly to her chest. Her dark eyes shimmered with disbelief but never dropped. "Ma'am, please," Grace began softly. But Vivian was already storming toward her, the sharp click of her heels echoing through the silence. Her silver gown shimmered like armor under the chandeliers. "You look at me when I'm speaking," she spat, voice quivering with rage. "You dare look me in the eye as if we're equals?" The crowd murmured. A senator's wife gasped. A young influencer whispered, "Isn't that the billionaire's wife?" Another voice followed, "Someone record this. This is insane." Grace lowered her gaze, her voice trembling but calm. "I was only doing my job, Mrs. Monroe." "Your job?" Vivian laughed bitterly. "Your job is to serve, not to speak." She snatched a crystal flute from a waiter's tray and hurled it to the floor. The glass shattered at Grace's feet, shards scattering like glittering shame. "Clean it up," Vivian snapped. Grace didn't move. The entire room held its breath. "I said clean it up." Vivian screamed, stepping closer, her breath thick with champagne and fury. "I'll clean it, ma'am," Grace whispered. "But not like that." Those 5 quiet words, soft, respectful and firm, were gasoline poured over Vivian Monroe's pride. Her hand trembled. Her eyes darted toward the banquet cart beside her, to the small glass vial she'd brought earlier that evening for her charity toast, a petty prop for her speech about transformation. It wasn't supposed to be used. But pride doesn't think. It burns. "You think you can humiliate me?" Vivian shrieked. "Let's see how you like humiliation." Someone screamed, "Vivian, don't." But the acid was already flying. A splash. A hiss. A scream that didn't sound human. Grace's tray crashed to the floor. The liquid burned through silk and skin. Her cry tore through the mansion, raw and unfiltered. Guests stumbled backward in horror, knocking over chairs, spilling champagne across white linen that now looked like blood. "Help her!" someone shouted. "She's burning!" Security surged forward, tackling Vivian as she fought and screamed, her hair disheveled, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "She provoked me! She embarrassed me in front of everyone!" And high above, from the balcony overlooking the chaos, Elliot Monroe stood frozen. His champagne flute slipped from his hand, shattering beside his shoes. His whisper was barely audible above the screams below. "Dear God! Grace!" The mansion that once symbolized power and perfection now echoed with panic, guilt, and the sound of everything falling apart. Before we continue this shocking story, pause for a second. If stories about power, betrayal, and justice behind mansion walls grip you like this one, hit subscribe right now. Like this video, comment where you're watching from, and tell me if you're already hooked, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, power, and family. The city looked clean from 30 floors up. Too clean, the way a showroom glitters before the first fingerprint. Elliot Monroe stood with his palms against the glass, eyes tracing the river of headlights that ran through downtown like a silver artery. The sun was tilting west, turning towers into burnished pillars and making the whole skyline pretend at holiness. In the reflection, he could see himself in the uniform of success. Charcoal suit, loosened tie, the faint, permanent tiredness of a man who had learned to smile through meetings, losses, and headlines. The tablet on his desk glowed with numbers that affirmed the brand. Employee satisfaction, retention, charitable impact, until you started reading the lines below the lines. Anonymous comments. Incident summaries. Phrases that shouldn't live inside a company like his. Talked down to, called out of name, promoted last, punished first. Little cuts that never made the news, that never went viral, because cruelty this small doesn't trend. It just accumulates. He scrolled slowly, jaw set, the way a surgeon might examine a scan and know the tumor is real before anyone says the word. Elliot had built a reputation on fairness and innovation, The man who insisted that luxury didn't have to sit on anyone's back. And yet here it was, his own house whispering a different story. He closed the report and let the tablet sleep. The office went quiet except for the faint hum of HVAC and the thin pulse of the city below. He tapped a single name on his phone. "Grace," he said when she answered. The words softened him. "You free?" "I can be," she said. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I don't want to talk about it on the phone." There was a beat of silence, the kind siblings share when worry has a familiar shape. "I'm 10 minutes away," she said. He put the phone down and, for a moment, didn't move. He thought of their mother, of her hands, always busy, always gentle, of the way she could turn a kitchen into a sanctuary with nothing but patience and order. "Dignity is not a luxury," she used to say, rinsing soap from a plate as if washing a chalice. "It's the baseline." He'd grown a whole empire around that sentence. Somewhere between the boardrooms and the galas, something had drifted. The elevator chimed. Grace stepped into the room with the same quiet energy that had made her a menace to complacency since she was 12. Jeans, white shirt, blazer thrown over her shoulder. No performance. No need. She crossed to him and stood at the glass, looking out at the same city with different eyes. She could name other kinds of traffic. Bus routes, neighborhoods where delivery drivers slept in their cars between shifts, the back entrances of hotels where staff smoked in quick bursts like stolen time. "What did you find?" she asked. Elliot handed her the tablet. He watched her face as she read, the way her mouth tightened at a slur written in paraphrase, the way she blinked slowly at a demotion that had no reason but skin. She scrolled, and he felt the room contract. When she finally put the tablet down, the office didn't simply feel quiet, it felt complicit. "You didn't build this to be a mask," she said. "I built it to be a promise," he answered. But promises don't enforce themselves. Grace walked a slow circle, touching nothing, taking everything in. She looked at the photos on the shelf, the two of them in a rented tux and a discount dress at his first awards dinner, their mother at a church picnic, smiling like light. "So what do you want to do? Release a statement? Fire a few middle managers? Donate to a cause and call it repair?" Elliot almost smiled. She had not come to pat his back. "I want to know what happens when no one thinks I'm watching," he said. "I want the truth unposed." She studied him, the way only a sister can. "You already know this might get ugly." "It's already ugly," he said. "I'm just deciding to see it." He told her about the gala. The Monroe Foundation's Winter Crown, 1,000 RSVPs, cameras on the lawn, celebrity speeches about transformation. A night designed to polish the brand. "The perfect petri dish," he said. "That's when people talk the loudest without knowing they're speaking." "You want me in there," she said, the idea arriving in her voice before he asked. "Not as me. Not as you," he said. "As one of the people every guest will look past. The ones who fill glasses, take coats, open doors, absorb moods. I need to know how they are treated when the room believes service is silence." Grace was already thinking in angles, entry points, cover stories, what she could reasonably overhear while refilling water. "You'll need a new ID," she said. "Different last name. Payroll routed through a contractor. And nobody else can know. Not HR. Not the event lead. Not your head of security. One glance at me and your entire staff will stand up straighter and smile like saints." "Agreed," he said. "It will be just us." He opened a drawer and slid a small envelope across the desk. Inside was a badge hungry for a name. "I can protect you from the fallout," he said. "I can't protect you from what you might hear." "I'm not fragile," she said. "I know." He took a breath, then confessed the part that had haunted him all week. "I also can't protect you from my wife." Grace lifted an eyebrow. Careful. "Vivian." "She's brilliant," he said, and he meant it. "She also measures love in attention and attention in dominance. She curates perfection because she's afraid of being ordinary. If she senses a threat, real or imagined, she pushes." "Does she push down?" Grace asked. "Sometimes," he said. Grace didn't look away. "Then this isn't just about the company. It's about the circle around it. He nodded. The circle sets the weather. They stood at the glass again, shoulder to shoulder. The sunset had thinned into a ribbon. Office lights flickered on across the city, a constellation built by ambition and janitors. In the reflection, he could see both of them, their faces aligned like a double exposure. Elliot's practiced restraint, Grace's unarmored conviction. "Say it," she told him. "The real reason you want me to do this." "I need proof," he said after a moment. "Not memos. Not rumors. Proof that demands change and survives the lawyers." "And if the proof is you?" she asked softly. "If what needs to change starts at home?" "Then it starts at home," he said, and the answer cost him something to say. She nodded once, the way a soldier nods to a map. "All right. Build me a doorway." They planned it in the quiet grammar of people who had done hard things together. A temporary agency already on the vendor list would place her. The name would be Grace Carter. Not a lie, just a portion. A shift orientation would be arranged around a fake scheduling conflict to avoid HR's onboarding ceremony. The floor manager would get a text with her photo and a curt note, last-minute hire, pulled from a preferred pool, sign her in. Wardrobe. Standard black and white uniform, non-slip shoes, hair tied back. The less she stood out, the more she would be seen. Access. Service corridors, staging kitchen, banquet floor. Responsibilities. Water, wine, and listening. Elliot drafted the emails while she dictated the limits. No alone time in locked spaces. No tasks outside her role. A dead phone in her pocket was a prop. A live one would be a tell. He would sit with security in a peripheral room during the gala under the pretext of logistics. He would not intervene unless there was danger. He agreed, and then he didn't, and then he agreed again because consent isn't the same as courage. "Password?" she asked. "For what?" "For when you see something and want to crash the room." Her smile tilted. "You, big brother, are a sprinter when you should be a chess player." He thought. Gethsemane. She blinked. Biblical. Mom's favorite garden, he said. The place where you sit with what you don't want and still choose. Fine, she said. If you text Gethsemane, it means hold your ground. If I text it, it means I need you now. He exhaled, and some tight band around his ribs eased. They didn't hug immediately. They were not that cinematic. But after a moment, he reached for her and she let herself be held, and everything that had gone feral in him settled its fur. You don't have to carry this for me, he said into her hair. I'm not, she said. I'm carrying it with you. That's different. When they stepped back, he went to the shelf and picked up a framed photo of their mother at the church picnic. Paper plate in one hand, plastic cup in the other, laughing with her whole face. He set it on the corner of the desk, as if to make the room witness. She didn't raise us to win, he said. She raised us to deserve it. Grace touched the glass. Then let's deserve it. They spent another hour on contingencies. What to do if Vivian approached, how to answer the soft interrogations of other staff, which exit routes didn't cross the camera lines that fed the PR team's highlight reel. As the plans thickened, the night outside thinned. The city darkened into 1,000 lit squares. Somewhere below, a bus sighed at a curb. In the building across the avenue, a janitor's cart clicked along a hallway, steady, unobserved. At the door, badge tucked safely into her blazer pocket, Grace paused. She turned back to the window and looked at the city as if it had just asked her a question. Let's see what this mansion really hides, she said. It wasn't bravado. It was a vow in a low voice. She left with the soft certainty of a tide going out. Elliot stood where she had stood and let the room be quiet again. He opened the invitation sitting on his desk, the heavy cardstock pretending, with its gilt edges and its serifed wealth, that transformation could be printed. The camera of the mind drifted down to the words embossed in perfect black. The Monroe Foundation Gala. A celebration of transformation. The card gleamed beneath the office light, immaculate, absolute, and utterly unaware of the night it was about to name. The Monroe mansion was already awake before sunrise. By 7, the driveway glimmered with delivery vans and catering trucks. Workers in black uniforms rushed through the grand iron gates, arms full of crystal boxes, linens, and flowers the color of champagne. Ladders clinked against marble, and chandeliers that already gleamed were polished again, just in case a camera caught a smudge. Every movement hummed with one purpose: to be flawless. At the top of the staircase, Vivian Monroe stood like a queen conducting a kingdom of panic. The silk belt of her robe shimmered as she pointed, corrected, and criticized with surgical precision. She moved through the hall in quick, graceful cuts, rearranging centerpieces, rejecting floral shades that weren't soft gold, and ordering staff to redo entire tables for looking too common. "Not those candles. Those are ivory, not pearl," she snapped at a trembling decorator. "Do I look like a woman who entertains under ivory?" Behind her, Chloe Banks, her friend and the self-crowned social media heartbeat of Atlanta, followed with a glass of mimosa and a rehearsed giggle. "You should see yourself, Viv. Total goddess mode. If people don't envy you tonight, they're blind." Vivian gave a polite smile, one of those flawless, camera-ready gestures that never reached her eyes. "They already envy me," she murmured. "That's the easy part." She didn't mention what had kept her awake for the last 3 nights. The whispers about a younger investor's wife, the latest article comparing new money youth to old glamour fading. Vivian had built her identity on being admired, on being the image beside her husband's empire. But admiration had an expiration date, and she could already smell the rot of irrelevance. A sound broke her thought. The click of heels, steady, rhythmic, unhurried. She turned. A new maid had entered the ballroom, carrying a tray of silverware. The woman moved differently, not rushed, not subservient, but with the quiet balance of someone accustomed to being seen. Her uniform was crisp, her hair pinned neatly, and when she glanced up to meet Vivian's eyes, she didn't flinch. Vivian's gaze sharpened. "Who is that?" she asked. Chloe shrugged. "New hire. The catering agency sent a few extras." "Why?" "She doesn't move like staff," Vivian said slowly. Chloe smiled slyly. "Maybe she used to be someone important." The comment was meant as a joke, but it landed like poison. Vivian's smile stiffened. Her eyes followed the maid, Grace Carter, as she placed cutlery with silent precision, her posture unbent even under the chandelier's glare. "Important," Vivian repeated softly. "In my house." Chloe twirled her mimosa, oblivious. "Relax. No one's stealing your spotlight. Tonight is your night. The charity queen herself." "Yes," Vivian said absently. "My night." By noon, reporters were already setting up outside the gates. Luxury cars began to glide up the long driveway like a slow parade of wealth. Inside, Vivian supervised the final touches: the champagne tower, the ice sculpture, the grand piano where a jazz trio would play as guests arrived. From the gallery above the ballroom, she watched Elliot Monroe appear in the doorway, his expression calm, sleeves rolled, greeting the staff by name. He was always like that, steady, unbothered, frustratingly kind. It made her blood stir. He crossed the room to inspect the arrangements. Grace happened to be nearby, polishing glasses. "Everything looks beautiful," Elliot said to Vivian, though his eyes flicked briefly toward Grace. "Thank you all for the hard work." Grace smiled politely. "Thank you, sir." Vivian saw it. That brief exchange, the warmth in his tone, the calm dignity in Grace's posture. To anyone else, it was nothing. To Vivian, it was a betrayal in embryo. After he left, she stood by the window a long moment, staring at the reflection of the two of them, her in silk and diamonds, Grace in black and white cotton, and the comparison made something hard tighten in her chest. "She's too confident," she muttered. Chloe, who had drifted back in with her phone, looked up from typing captions. "Who?" "That maid," Vivian said. "She talks to him like she belongs here." "Oh, Viv." Chloe laughed. "You're imagining things. Elliot talks to everyone like that. It's why people love him." Vivian turned sharply. "People don't love him. They admire him. There's a difference." But Chloe had already gone back to her phone. As the afternoon faded into the gold of early evening, the mansion transformed. Candlelight rippled across mirrored surfaces, violins tuned, and the scent of orchids filled the air. Staff hurried through corridors with trays of crystal and caviar. In the master suite, Vivian dressed slowly, watching herself in the mirror as a stylist pinned her hair into a perfect updo. The mirror was her truest audience, honest, cruel, and merciless. She studied the faint lines near her eyes, the ones foundation couldn't quite erase, and imagined the headlines tomorrow. Vivian Monroe stuns at Transformation Gala. The word stuns mattered more than she'd ever admit. But beneath the diamonds and the soft perfume, fear coiled tight. What if no one was stunned anymore? What if all they saw was the wife of the billionaire, the accessory to someone else's empire? "Ma'am," the stylist asked gently. "You all right?" Vivian blinked. "Perfect," she said. "I'm always perfect." When the stylist left, she leaned closer to the mirror, lowering her voice to a whisper meant only for herself. "No one outshines me in my house." She moved to her dressing table, where rows of jewelry glittered like obedient stars. Rings, earrings, brooches, all pieces of armor. She reached for the velvet box that held her showpiece for the night, a diamond necklace Elliot had bought for her 10th anniversary. But beside it, half hidden, was another item, a small crystal vial. She picked it up. The liquid inside shimmered faintly under the lamp. It was part of her speech, her grand metaphor for transformation. She planned to hold it up during her toast and talk about turning suffering into strength, a flourish for the cameras. The contents were harmless enough, so she believed, a diluted acid mixture supplied by the decorator to clean marble sculptures, repurposed as a visual prop. Vivian smiled faintly, admiring the way it caught the light. "A little drama never hurts," she murmured. She slipped the vial into her clutch beside her lipstick, unaware of the invisible thread that had just been tied between her vanity and her fate. Downstairs, the music swelled as the first guests began to arrive. The mansion glowed like a crown. And in a quiet corridor beyond the noise, Grace Carter adjusted her apron and took a steadying breath. The night was ready to begin, its elegance flawless, its danger invisible. Upstairs, Vivian Monroe turned from her mirror one last time, satisfied. In her clutch, the crystal vial gleamed softly, waiting to rewrite everything she believed about power and perfection. The Monroe mansion glittered like a movie set that night. Cameras flashed outside as sleek cars rolled up the long driveway, each one spilling out guests dressed in designer gowns and sharp tuxedos. Reporters shouted questions from behind velvet ropes while spotlights swept across the sky. The theme for the evening was printed in gold across every invitation and banner, a future without barriers. Inside, it was hard not to see the irony. The ballroom pulsed with life. Music, laughter, clinking glasses. Waiters in white jackets carried silver trays stacked with champagne. Guests praised themselves for attending a charity event for equality, while complaining about traffic, food portions, and stock prices. The air smelled like perfume, ego, and hypocrisy. Grace Carter moved quietly between the tables, her posture straight, her eyes alert. She balanced a tray of glasses with practiced grace, careful not to draw attention yet seeing everything. She noticed how the servers spoke only when spoken to, how a few guests joked about diversity quotas between sips of vintage wine, and how every kind smile toward her carried a thin layer of pity. Each detail mattered. Each comment was a note in the story she'd been sent to collect for Elliot. Her notebook stayed tucked inside her apron, but every moment was being written in her mind. At the center of it all stood Vivian Monroe, radiant in a white gown that glittered like ice. Cameras loved her. Guests loved her. And for most of the night, she loved herself. Every laugh, every compliment fed her the attention she craved. Until she heard it. Two women near the dessert table whispered while looking her way. "Who's that new maid?" one asked. "The tall one with the perfect posture. She moves like she's been trained for something else." "She's beautiful," the other said. "Almost carries herself better than Mrs. Monroe." The words hit Vivian like a slap. Her smile faltered for just a second. "Excuse me," she asked sweetly, pretending she hadn't heard. "Oh, nothing," the women stammered. "Just saying your staff looks impressive." Vivian forced a laugh, but her eyes followed Grace across the room, burning holes through every quiet movement she made. Grace poured wine for a table of investors, bowed slightly, and walked away with effortless calm. There was something about her, something steady, that Vivian couldn't stand. A few minutes later, she pulled Chloe Banks aside near the grand staircase. "That maid," Vivian said. "The dark-skinned one near the piano. Who hired her?" Chloe looked confused. "No idea. She's probably from the agency." Vivian's voice dropped. "She doesn't move like agency staff." Chloe rolled her eyes. "Vivian, please. You're just overthinking. It's your big night. Don't waste it worrying about a maid." Vivian smiled tightly. "You're right," she said. But the thought didn't leave. As the evening wore on, Grace noticed how people behaved once they thought no one important was watching. A man snapped his fingers for a refill without looking up. Another waved a waiter away mid-sentence. Two women laughed quietly at the way a busboy's accent rolled his words. Grace's heart tightened, but her face stayed calm. "Observation before reaction," she whispered to herself, the rule Elliot had drilled into her before this mission. Still, there was one thing she couldn't ignore: Vivian's eyes on her. Every time she entered the ballroom, she could feel the weight of that stare. Cold, searching, angry. Near midnight, Grace slipped into the hallway behind the main stage to catch her breath. The sound of music faded behind thick doors. The air here was quieter, cooler, lined with portraits of Elliot's ancestors watching from gilded frames. She thought she was alone. Then she heard the voice. "You seem very comfortable around my husband." Grace turned. Vivian stood in the doorway, her expression calm but sharp enough to cut glass. The smile on her lips was small, practiced, deadly. Grace held her ground. "I'm sorry." Vivian took a slow step closer. "Don't play dumb. I saw how he spoke to you earlier. The smile. The attention. That's not how my husband talks to staff." "He thanked me, ma'am," Grace said evenly. "That's all." Vivian tilted her head. "And that's all it takes, isn't it? A polite word, a little charm, and suddenly the help starts believing they belong." Grace's stomach turned, but her voice stayed calm. "With respect, Mrs. Monroe, I'm just doing my job." Vivian's smile disappeared. "Then watch your tone. This isn't a place for attitude." "I understand," Grace said. But the calm in her tone, so steady, so controlled, felt like defiance. Vivian's hand twitched slightly, the diamonds on her fingers catching the light. "Good," she said finally. "Because I don't tolerate disrespect in my house." Grace nodded and stepped aside. "Excuse me, ma'am." Vivian walked past her slowly, perfume filling the hall like smoke. At the end of the corridor, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Let's see how long that pride lasts," she murmured. Grace watched her disappear into the ballroom, trying to shake the unease that crawled up her spine. She took a deep breath, adjusted her uniform, and returned to work, unaware that her calm composure had just become a spark to someone else's fire. Back in the main hall, the music swelled again, louder than before. Laughter filled the air, glasses clinked, and the rich toasted to a world without barriers, too proud to see the one standing right in front of them. And somewhere between the laughter and applause, Vivian Monroe's clutch shifted against her side. Inside, a small glass vial clinked softly, catching the light as she walked. The sound of celebration drowned it out, but for anyone who might have heard, that faint clink was the quiet beginning of disaster. The Monroe Gala had reached its peak. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, laughter, and the clink of crystal. Music floated above the crowd, smooth jazz from the grand piano near the stage. Champagne poured like water, cameras flashed, and for a brief moment, it looked like perfection could last forever. Upstairs, Elliot Monroe was in his private study, entertaining a circle of investors. Their laughter echoed faintly through the open balcony doors that overlooked the ballroom. From above, he could see everything: the glitter, the dancing, the world he'd built to look unshakable. He had no idea the cracks were already spreading. Down below, Grace Carter moved through the crowd with quiet focus. Her tray shimmered with half-empty glasses, her steps steady, invisible. She'd spent the night listening, recording every careless remark, every hint of bias, building a case Elliot could never have gathered on his own. She was almost done. At the far end of the hall, Vivian Monroe stood surrounded by her friends, laughter too loud, gestures too rehearsed. The gown she wore sparkled under the chandeliers, a masterpiece of silver lace and pride. To everyone watching, she looked untouchable. Inside, she was burning. Every time she caught sight of Grace gliding across the floor, calm and composed, the jealousy twisted tighter. Then, it happened. Grace turned, tray in hand, stepping through a cluster of guests. The crowd shifted suddenly, a waiter brushed past, a chair scraped back, and Grace bumped lightly into Vivian's shoulder. A single drop of red wine spilled. It splashed against the silver gown like blood on glass. Time stopped. The music faded mid-note. Laughter died. Every head turned toward the sound of the glass clinking onto the marble floor. Vivian froze. Her face didn't move at first, then a smile spread across it, slow, too sweet, too calm. "Do you know what you've done?" she asked softly. Her voice carried even in the silence. Grace set her tray down, eyes wide. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. It was an accident." Vivian's tone sharpened. "An accident," she repeated. "You clumsy girl. Do you have any idea what this gown costs?" Around them, guests exchanged uneasy glances. Someone lifted a phone. Another whispered, "Is she really doing this here?" Vivian took a step closer, her perfume heavy in the air. "You filthy girl," she hissed, her voice cracking under the weight of anger. "You think you can ruin my night and get away with it?" Grace shook her head, hands trembling. "Please, Mrs. Monroe, I didn't mean to." "Then fix it," Vivian snapped. "Go ahead. On your knees." The crowd gasped. Even Chloe Banks, who had been laughing moments earlier, went silent. Grace's voice was small, but firm. "Respect isn't earned that way." That sentence landed like a strike of lightning. Murmurs swept through the ballroom. Cameras lifted higher. The music stopped completely. The entire room became a stage, and Vivian Monroe was at the center of it, her pride cornered, her fury exposed. She laughed once, short, bitter, shaking. "Respect," she said. "You want to talk about respect?" Her hand went to her clutch. The small glass vial inside clinked faintly as she pulled it out. Her voice trembled, a mix of rage and something darker. "You want respect. Here's what it costs." Someone in the crowd shouted, "Vivian, don't!" But the liquid was already flying. A flash of motion. A scream that split the air. Grace's tray hit the floor as she clutched her face. Her scream echoed through the ballroom. Raw, piercing, human. Guests stumbled backward. Glass shattered. Champagne poured across white linens, looking like spilled blood under the chandeliers. "She's burning!" someone cried. "Oh my God!" Chloe dropped her phone and ran forward, tears streaking her face. "Vivian, what have you done?" Vivian stood frozen, the empty vial trembling in her hand. The madness that had filled her moments ago drained into horror. "She provoked me!" she shouted. "She embarrassed me! Security stormed in, pushing through the panicked crowd. Waiters threw napkins, water, anything to help. Grace collapsed to her knees, screaming, the skin on her cheek blistering where the acid had touched. Upstairs, Elliot heard the noise first, a scream that didn't belong in his house. He turned toward the balcony, confusion twisting into dread. He saw the chaos below, the swarm of people, the flash of cameras, and at the center, Grace on the floor. For a split second, his mind refused to believe it. Then he saw Vivian, her gown streaked with red, her face wild. And he knew. The glass in his hand slipped and shattered. "Dear God," he whispered, voice cracking. "Grace!" He ran. Down the staircase, through the crowd that parted in stunned silence, his footsteps echoing like thunder. People turned to watch as the billionaire who'd built an empire on grace and discipline lost every trace of composure. Grace looked up weakly, her voice breaking through the chaos. "Elliot!" The guests froze, realization hitting all at once. This wasn't just another servant. He fell to his knees beside her, ignoring the cameras, The crowd, the whispers. "Stay with me," he said, his voice shaking. "Stay with me, Grace." Security pinned Vivian by the arms as she screamed and struggled, mascara running, her jewelry glinting under the lights. "She made me do it. She disrespected me." The music had stopped. The laughter was gone. The mansion that once symbolized success now echoed with panic and shame. Elliot looked up at the people watching, hundreds of them, silent, shocked, phones recording, and for the first time in his life, he didn't care about appearances. He only cared about the woman in his arms, the sister he'd promised to protect. He pressed his hand over hers. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. The crowd whispered his name. The headlines were already writing themselves. And somewhere behind the flashing lights and broken glass, Vivian Monroe's world finally cracked. Elliot lifted his head, eyes full of fury and grief, and shouted her name, "Grace!" as security dragged Vivian away. The revelation of who Grace really was seconds from turning scandal into tragedy. Sirens screamed through the night as the ambulance tore down the highway. Inside, Elliot Monroe sat beside his sister, clutching her hand. The smell of antiseptic and burned fabric filled the small space. Grace lay motionless, an oxygen mask covering her face, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Stay with me," Elliot whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, Grace. Just stay with me." The paramedic glanced up, shaking his head slightly. "We're doing everything we can, sir. She's strong. Strong." The word hit Elliot like a knife. She had been strong for him, gone undercover because he asked her to. Now she was fighting for her life because of his plan. Behind the ambulance, the flashing red and blue lights reflected off news vans racing toward the same destination. The story had already escaped the mansion. Reporters shouted through live feeds. "Breaking news: Billionaire's wife accused in acid attack at Monroe Gala." By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, the world was watching. Back at the mansion, chaos had turned into spectacle. Police cars lined the circular driveway, camera flashes turning night into a storm of white light. Vivian Monroe sat in the back of a patrol car, her hands cuffed, her mascara streaking down her face. "It was an accident," she sobbed. "She provoked me. She ruined everything." Officers ignored her. The cameras didn't. Microphones pressed against the window, hungry for her words. "Mrs. Monroe, did you know the victim? Was it racially motivated? Did your husband witness the attack?" Vivian screamed as the door slammed shut, silencing the questions, but not the whispers that had already gone viral. At the hospital, Elliot paced the sterile hallway, his suit jacket torn, his hands stained with dried blood and champagne. The emergency doors swung open every few minutes, nurses rushing in and out, voices low, faces tight. A doctor finally stepped forward. "Mr. Monroe." Elliot turned instantly. "Is she?" "She's alive," the doctor said. "We stabilized her, but the burns are severe. We're doing everything to save her eyesight. It's too soon to tell." Elliot pressed a shaking hand to his forehead, the words hitting like hammer blows. He nodded, unable to speak. "She's asking for you," the doctor added softly. Inside the recovery room, Grace's face was wrapped in bandages. Her voice came weak, but steady. "Elliot." He took her hand. "I'm here." She smiled faintly. "Guess the truth's out sooner than we planned." Tears blurred his vision. "I'm so sorry. This wasn't supposed to happen." Grace squeezed his fingers. "Don't you dare feel guilty for her choices." But he already did. Every headline, every flash, every camera pointed at the hospital doors felt like judgment. His billion-dollar empire, once admired for its ethics, now stood on the edge of collapse. By morning, the story had consumed every screen. #Monroe Scandal trended worldwide. Protesters gathered outside Monroe Tower, holding signs that read, "Justice for Grace," and "Money doesn't wash hate." Sponsors suspended partnerships. Investors withdrew. The foundation Elliot had spent years building was now synonymous with cruelty. He sat alone in his office, watching the news on mute, footage of Vivian screaming, Grace being carried out on a stretcher, the mansion glowing behind them like a cursed kingdom. "This is my fault," he whispered. His assistant tried to speak, but he raised a hand. "Cancel the press conference. No statements until Grace wakes up." He turned off the TV, only for the silence to feel worse. In the county jail, Vivian Monroe sat on a metal bunk, still in the silver gown from the gala. The glamour was gone. Her hair was tangled, her makeup streaked, her hands trembling. Across from her, a small mirror bolted to the wall reflected a stranger, pale, hollow, eyes wide with disbelief. She'd watched the footage over and over on the news that played in the hallway. The moment she threw the acid. The scream. The look on Elliot's face. At first, she'd told herself it wasn't her fault, that Grace had provoked her, that she'd been humiliated. But as the hours passed, the excuses dissolved. The woman in the mirror wasn't the victim anymore. She was the monster in every headline. When the cell door clanged open, she flinched. Elliot stepped in, his face unreadable. The guard shut the door behind them. "Elliot," she began, her voice cracking. "Please. You have to believe me. It was a mistake." He cut her off, his tone low but steady. "You attacked my sister." Vivian froze. "What?" "Grace," he said. "The maid you thought was beneath you, she's my sister." The color drained from her face. "No. No, that's not true." "It is," Elliot said coldly. "She was working undercover for me, to expose what people like you hide behind smiles and charity speeches." Vivian's knees buckled. "Oh, God." Elliot's voice hardened. "You didn't just attack her, Vivian. You burned the only person who believed this world could still be kind." She sobbed. "Elliot, please. You have to help me." He looked at her, the woman he once thought he knew, and saw nothing but ruin. "Help you," he said. "I'm done protecting pride. You destroyed the one thing I can't replace." She reached for him, but he stepped back. "I'll make sure you get a fair trial," he said quietly. "That's more mercy than you gave her." When he turned to leave, she collapsed to the floor, clutching her head, whispering through her tears, "What have I done?" Outside the jail, cameras waited. Reporters shouted questions as Elliot stepped into the flashing lights. His face was pale, his eyes red, but his voice was calm. "Mr. Monroe, will you divorce your wife? Is it true the victim is your sister? Are you stepping down as CEO?" He paused, then faced them squarely. "The Monroes are rebuilding," he said. "Not to hide this, but to make it right." The crowd fell silent. As the cameras rolled, Elliot turned away, the echo of sirens still lingering in the distance, the sound of a life shattered, and a man determined to rebuild from the wreckage. Back in the hospital, Grace stirred in her bed as a nurse whispered, "She's waking up." And across town, a headline flashed, "The Grace Foundation, rumors swirl of a new beginning." 8 months later, the Monroe mansion didn't look like the same place. The gold chandeliers still hung from the ceilings, and the marble still shone, but the energy was different. It wasn't cold anymore. It wasn't about power or status. It was alive again, this time for something far more meaningful. A new sign stood proudly at the gates. The Grace Foundation. A refuge for survivors. A home for new beginnings. Guests gathered on the lawn, journalists with cameras and microphones, community workers, and dozens of women dressed in soft pastel uniforms. Women who, like Grace, had walked through fire and come out stronger. The grand reopening wasn't just a ceremony. It was a statement to the world. Grace Carter stepped out from the mansion doors. The crowd fell silent. She no longer hid behind hats or scarves. The faint scars along her cheek caught the morning sun, glowing like proof that healing doesn't erase pain, it redefines it. Her hair was shorter now, her step slower, but her spirit filled the space like light through stained glass. Elliot Monroe stood beside her, dressed simply, without the air of a billionaire. There was humility in his eyes, and pride that had nothing to do with business. "You turned pain into power," he said quietly. Grace smiled. "You gave me the chance to." They shared a look, not of guilt or grief, but of understanding. The kind that only two people who had survived the same storm could share. Then Grace stepped toward the podium. The cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. She looked over the crowd, at the survivors, the journalists, the workers, and even the curious neighbors who had once whispered about that scandal. Then she began to speak. 8 months ago, she said, her voice calm but steady, I walked into this house pretending to be someone else. I came here to uncover the truth about how people treat those they think are beneath them. I left this house in an ambulance. She paused, the crowd hanging on every word. I could have let that night define me by its cruelty. I could have stayed angry or bitter. But the truth is, the world already has enough of that. So instead, I chose to rebuild. A murmur of quiet agreement rippled through the audience. Elliot bowed his head slightly, emotion tightening his throat. Grace continued. Today this house, the same one that once held so much pain, is being opened again. Not for parties. Not for headlines. But for people who've been made to feel small, broken, or invisible. Her voice grew stronger. The Grace Foundation will provide training, housing, and rehabilitation for survivors of acid attacks and domestic workers who've suffered abuse. No one should ever lose their dignity because someone else couldn't control their pride. Applause began to rise, soft at first, then louder, rolling through the crowd like a wave. Cameras flashed. Reporters wiped tears. Grace smiled gently. Forgiveness, she said, isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about refusing to let hate have the last word. I forgave, not because it was easy, but because healing demanded it. As she spoke, the camera cut to a small television screen inside a gray prison common room miles away. Vivian Monroe sat on a metal chair, eyes fixed on the broadcast. Her once glamorous hair had grown dull and uneven, her skin pale under fluorescent light. The silver gown and diamonds were long gone, replaced by a plain beige uniform. She watched Grace on the screen, the woman she'd tried to destroy, now standing tall, radiant, applauded by the world. Tears streamed down Vivian's face. She whispered to no one, I did this. I made her this strong. The other inmates barely looked up, but she didn't care. For the first time, Vivian saw herself clearly, not as a victim of pride, but as its architect. And as Grace's words echoed through the room, something inside her finally broke. Back at the mansion, Grace took the ceremonial scissors from a young survivor standing beside her, a girl no older than 20 who had been burned by her employer years earlier. Together, they cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in applause. It wasn't the kind of applause that came from admiration. It was the sound of healing, of people seeing that even in the worst of circumstances, something beautiful can still grow. Elliot placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. She'd be proud, he said quietly. Grace looked up toward the sky, her eyes softening. Mother, we did it, she whispered. For a moment, the sunlight broke through the clouds, washing the mansion in a warm glow. The same mansion where pain once screamed now filled with laughter, promise, and purpose. Reporters shouted questions, asking how she found the strength to forgive, what came next, and whether she'd ever speak to Vivian again. Grace smiled, her answer simple but powerful. This isn't about revenge or the past. It's about what comes after. She turned to the survivors gathered behind her. Every person here reminds me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply keeps going. The cameras caught her final smile as she stepped down from the podium and walked into the crowd, shaking hands, hugging survivors, and talking to women who had once believed their lives were over. The foundation's doors opened behind her, welcoming the first group of new arrivals. Elliot watched from a few feet away, his chest heavy with emotion. The mansion that once symbolized power now stood as a monument to empathy. And Grace Carter, the woman who had walked in as a maid, left in an ambulance, and returned as a leader, had become something larger than her scars. As the scene faded to the sound of applause and camera shutters, her voice narrated softly over the final image. She survived hate, and built a future where kindness would never again be mistaken for weakness. Top of form. Bottom of form. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Hit subscribe and join our growing community that believes in justice, compassion, and second chances. Tap like if you believe kindness is stronger than cruelty, and share this video so Grace's story reaches someone who needs hope today. Tell me in the comments, what does turning pain into purpose mean to you?